Welcome to Saddle Up and Sound Off.
Our weekly variety podcast, inviting our listeners to challenge beliefs and find inspiration in thought-provoking conversations and stories. And we're your hosts, Suzanne and Dwight.
So in the last two episodes, we talked about your growing up in South Africa and attending Pretoria Boys High, your journey to the United States, where you made your way across country to Casper College, and where you met Steve, and eventually became part of their family, working the ranch out there. We also talked about in episode two, I think it was, that when you met Mom and convincing her to go back to South Africa with you, where you proposed to her and got married. Eventually, you guys came back to America, and that's where we're going to pick up from. You came back on the exact same freighter that you had gone out there initially. And what happened when you guys got back to the United States?
Yeah, thank you, Dwight. It was pretty cool talk about gratitude and joy. Speaking of joy, your grandma Joy and grandpa met your mom and I in New Hampshire, where friends of theirs had a place there, and I want to say Sugarloaf Mountain or something, but lifelong friends of theirs. And we actually drove back to Illinois with Grandpa and Grandma, which was
From
pretty cool.
Boston or?
From we got a rent-a-car when we landed in New York on this one.
Oh,
Yeah, on this trip we landed in New York and then got a rent-a-car and went up to New Hampshire to, I want to say, Sugarloaf Mountain or something. And then we got a U-Haul there and pulled that behind Grandpa and Grandma's car. And then came across, stopped at Niagara Falls, which was kind of cool. Anyway, and then went back to Illinois, where we bought a car, an old Volvo. And in those days, nobody knew what a Volvo was. But it was one of those old humpback things, looked like a tortoise. Anyway, we drove all over the country with it, had a good time with it, went down to Florida and visited your great-grandparents down there and some of Mom's friends. And then eventually went to, and I'm not sure why we went to Denver first, because we knew we were going to Casper College and going to go back to Casper College. But anyway, we started in Denver for a few months and then went to Casper College, where I enrolled back in college with the intent of finishing so that I could go on to finish the wildlife management degree. And I didn't want to, I knew it, obviously, Mom was pregnant with you then.
uh-huh.
And so we didn't want Mom to work if we could. And so I didn't want to get a job for minimum wage. But anyway, I went to the local Ford dealer and told him I was a student, but that I would like to sell cars part-time, and most of my classes were done by the afternoon anyway. So I could work in the afternoons and evenings and weekends, of course, which is when most of the traffic was. And so I'll never forget it. The sales manager, Dan Schneider, said, "Look, I'll hire you, but we can't let the dealer know because he doesn't want students working here, and he certainly doesn't want anybody working part-time. But if you will do that, and if you'll keep your sales numbers up, you can have a job." And so that's what we did. And of course, it worked out very well for me because that's, like I said, most of your traffic was in the afternoons and evenings.
Mm-hmm.
And and the business was very good to me. We had oil, we had coal, we had gas, we had uranium. Everything was booming in Casper, so in Wyoming generally. So so it worked out well. And then I was making, relatively speaking, an awful lot of money. In fact, I don't remember how I found this out, but I was making more than our college president was making.
Really?
Oh yeah, it was amazing. Dwight paid, of course, on a commission basis, and in those years, the commissions were very high that they paid, and you literally could make, and we did make an awful lot of money, relatively speaking. And I don't remember the numbers anymore, but of course, in those days too, cars were a lot less, and I reminds me of we had a so this was early 70s. We had a brand new Ford F-100 pickup sitting in the driveway where you drove into Grinder Ford on special for $1,995. And it had this in the window, and it was a 6-cylinder and what we called 3 on the tree in those days. So a gear shift on the steering column, 3-speed. So anyway, so Rancher comes in and I get him, and and even in those days, 1995 was a screamer price. It was a lost loser. It was, to draw traffic. So this old guy comes in and says, "Is that the right prices at 1995?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I'll take it." I said, "You want to drive it?" He said, "No, 1995, I'll take it." So I said, "Write it up." So I sit down. I start writing up $1,995. And he said, "Wait, I thought you said it's 1995. I said, "It is 1,995. Oh, he said, "I thought it was $19.95." I'll never forget that.
I'd have
Anyway,
bought too.
yeah, no kidding. But it doesn't. So, like I said, the business was very good to me, and we were having a hell time, and I was enjoying it. I never looked at at selling cars, quote unquote, as selling cars. And of
Mhm.
course, the business didn't have a particularly good reputation in those years. It was known for all kinds of shenanigans and tricks and stuff. But um, I considered all I had to do. People were coming in because they needed a vehicle. I didn't have to, quote unquote, sell them a vehicle. All I had to do was, as Stephen Covey says, seek to understand, ask them the right questions, listen, find out what they like and what they don't like, and then match those with, you know, a vehicle that we had on the lot. And anyway, it worked very well. So my dear friend Pete Greiner and I, who still talk today, his dad was the dealer then, and his dad was a feisty old guy. Never did find out that I was a student. But anyway, his dad dropped dead one night. Um, Unexpectedly from a heart attack, and that's what we were talking about. What an incredible a privilege it is, and how I couldn't have scripted my ending any better than this, where we've had all this time to say these awesome goodbyes.
Yeah.
And in Pete's dad's case, and he never had that opportunity anyway. So Pete's dad dies, and Pete was in his early 20s then, and Ford Motor Company came and said, "We're taking the franchise back. You're too young to be a dealer." So Pete, in his infinite wisdom, said, "Give me a year and I'll show you what we can do." And everything in the business in those days was ranked on your market share.
Mhm.
How much of the market share were you getting compared to Chevy, Dodge, and all the others? So set some goals, and Ford said, "Okay, we'll give you a year, and if you can maintain these standards, we'll sell you the franchise." And so one day Pete sat down with me and he said, "Look, this business has been so good to you. Why don't you quit school and why don't you help us um, hit these targets?" And basically made me an offer I couldn't refuse. Said that he'd help me buy dealerships and sort of become my banker and partner up with me if we got this done.
Hmm.
So we had a hey old time, and that's one of the things about being given opportunities in life
Yeah.
and opportunities coming along that and shows you God's sense of humor. I mean, who on earth would have thought that I was going to go from being a wildlife veterinarian to a car dealer? So I went home that night and said to your mother, "Look, I know you may thought you married a wildlife veterinarian, but there's no way we can turn this thing down. It shouldn't do well enough for us where we can buy our own nature reserve or game reserve one day." And um, isn't that interesting? That's how it ended up turning out. But Pete gave me an incredible opportunity. And the lessons from that was uh, sort of quote unquote go with the flow. Malcolm Brickland in his book Blink talks about in an instant, sometimes when you meet somebody that, I really like this person, or I want to get to know them better, or the opposite. I
Hmm.
really not like to get to know this person. But there's just something inside of you. And the same with a business deal or a situation. You either feel very comfortable with it, or sometimes you don't. And Malcolm Gladwell in that book talks about how important it is to follow your instincts, sort of that is your God-given experience and lessons and everything you've learned that says, yeah, this feels right, or no, it doesn't. And it doesn't always happen that way, but
Yeah.
certainly often does. And anyway, this just immediately felt like it was the right thing. And also said to your mom, I think we can have an impact on the industry. It certainly needed a lot of help. Customer satisfaction was was unheard of in those days, and people generally, sadly, were not treated as well as they should have been. So that started, that whole career. Pete ended up making me a manager. Eventually, he gave me an opportunity to be a partner, and then eventually um, backed me and funded me and became my partner when we bought our first dealership in Denver, which was uh, a Jeep dealership. Which, when I bought it, we were 100 and I think 20th or something like that in ranked in volume in the nation. And 6, 7 years later, when I sold it to Tom and them, that year we became the number one Jeep dealer in the world. So
Wow.
that was an awfully fun trip. And then, as you know, we just bought more dealerships and had many different franchises over the years. And as part of that process, again, things just happening. Um, we got a lot of notoriety when we were in the top dealers, and people would come and visit you at the dealership and tour the dealership and look for sort of the silver bullet. What's the one thing we can do to make it uh, to duplicate what you're doing here? And of course, there is no silver bullet. Your life is like making a cake, building a cake. It's got all the different ingredients, and if you leave one of them out, the outcome is going to be different. So it's all the different things. Certainly, some are more important than
Yeah.
others. It's all the different things you do that make you who you are and make you deliver the results that you deliver. And we were extremely blessed to have had um, 3 or 4 really, really good businesses that turned out uh, more than good, that turned out great for us. But there were dozens upon dozens upon dozens of businesses that I tried that didn't.
Hmm.
I honestly can't tell you how many do I really can't. And I don't mean 1 or 2 dozen or 3 dozen. It was it was bunches. I don't know if it was 100, but it was bunches and bunches and bunches of things that I tried, and I don't believe there's no such thing as failure in my mind. All of those things that I did um, that didn't work out the way I wanted to, every single time I learned, and every single time I felt it was kind of like tuition. It was my fee, particularly because I never finished college. This was my tuition and it was in some cases millions and millions of dollars lost on ventures, and that was literally my tuition, and so it's never, in my opinion, it's never a waste. It was never a waste of time for me to do those things. I
Yeah.
like to tell people we never lost a dime on any of our investments. Um, but we didn't have the money come back where it was supposed to come back to. But I didn't lose it because I know where it went. It just didn't come. It didn't come back. It didn't
Right.
come back to me. So, so I think the lessons that I learned from that is um, over and over again is perseverance. Just keep going. Don't stop. Every time you get knocked down, get back up. And if you have to start over, and twice in our lives, um, we ran into serious trouble financially, and we
Hmm.
went from having a lot to having nothing. And your dear mother stuck with me through all of that, and so did you and Jessica. Thank you. And I mean, literally, there are not many women who would have stuck with and put up with what your dear mother put up with. It was just, it was some incredible, incredible rides. Literally, like I said, from having everything and more, um, including, as you remember, having the French Normandy castle that was billed as the castle at Castle Pines when we when we had the British butler and maid, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas, because I thought if your mom was living in the castle, we should have a British butler and maid, and I called Ivor Spencer's School for British butlers, and um, and and we hired them to come to work for us. Anyway, I'm saying all of that to say, from those highs to jetting around in corporate jets to having nothing, and how do you survive that? How do you overcome that? How do
Hmm.
you build all over again? And one of the things that kept me going was, um, and I actually learned that selling cars as a student. You'd get into sales slumps,
Hmm.
and you'll go a few days without selling anything, and then you'll go another day without selling. And most people get really discouraged by that. Well, I got I got psyched by it because I learned and I realized every day I go without a sale puts me closer to my next sale. I don't know
Yeah.
when it's going to be. I don't know if it's going to be today or tomorrow, but I know for a fact I am one day closer to my solution or to the next sale. And
Hmm.
that's the same thing I did when we went through those, like I said, uh, honestly wondering where I was going to get the money for the next bag of groceries. And I would keep thinking, well, I don't know what the solution is. I still don't know how I'm going to get out of this, but I know I'm one day closer.
Hmm.
And that's where your faith comes into it so strongly. Um, Knowing that God was not necessarily going to perform a miracle per se, but God was going to give me the strength to go through it. And of course, it was around that time too that you got in your accident. The first time we ran into this buzzsaw and lost everything. And at the same time, you had your accident, almost lost your life. And so we're going through all of that. And it was, your inspiration and your willingness after, what was it, 13 or 14 amputations on your leg. When the surgeon came in that one night and said, we're still not on top of the infection is back, and we're going to have to amputate your leg again. And he left, and you turned to me, and you'd been so tough up to that point. And you turned to me and you said, I'm done. I'm not going back.
Yeah.
And you had said that to him, and he said, Dwight, if you don't go back in, this infection will kill you. We've already struggled to save your life. We've saved your life from blood clots. This is the last thing we've got to overcome. But this infection is such that if we don't get on top of it, it will kill you. And so, anyway, he left. And so, uh, So you said to me, I'm not going back in, I'm done. And I said, Dwight, it's going to kill you. And you said, that's fine. I'm done. I'm ready to go. And I said, you can't do that, Dwight, after having been so tough and having been through so much. You cannot quit now. And I'm gonna get choked up. And you said, will you pray for me? And I said, yeah. And I said, what do you want me to pray for? And you said, if there's a God and he performs miracles, I want my leg back. And I went, pooh. Dwight, I cannot do that. I cannot. I cannot pray. I don't know why, but I just, maybe my lack of faith. But I cannot pray and ask God to grow your leg back. But here's what I can do. I will pray and ask God to give you the courage and the wisdom and the strength and the fortitude and everything else that you need to continue fighting this battle so that you can come through it on the other end. And that's all I can pray for, but I'm sorry I can't pray for the rest. So anyway, we prayed, and I mean, lo and behold, Dwight, you came back from saying, no, I'm ready to die, and I'm not going to, because obviously, I mean, not obviously, I didn't know it, but you know it. Few people know just how painful it is every time they do that amputation and cut the bone, and
Mhm.
and um, and you came back and you said, I'm ready to do it, and therein, as I've told the story so many times, the inspiration that you have uh, provided me. So I'm saying all this still in the light of gratitude and joy, meaning there's all these highs and all these lows in our lives, personal health, financial, marriage, on and on and on, that that we have to work our way through. And in addition to our faith, and that's why I love that expression, no God, no peace, no God, no peace, meaning N-O God and N-O peace, and K-N-O God and K-N-O peace. And I love that because it is so true, because without that, I have no idea. I have no idea how I would have got through um, everything that we went through. And the same with your mother and my marriage now 54 years ago in a few months. Uh, we had some very, very tough times. And like I said, there's not many women that would have, not many women or anybody who would have stuck with, first of all, what I put you all through with those highs and lows from everything to nothing and back again. And just the way I treated you, and I was so tough and strict on you guys when you were growing up.
No, but I've never felt that way, and you remember you talked about the headmaster, whatever, Pretoria, and how grateful
Yeah.
you were to him for being tough on you. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe he was a little over tough. You weren't tough.
Well, thank you, but um, but yeah, I mean, your mom and I went through some times where, again, you know, mom mom could have walked, and I as much as said, I'll give you everything because I know I can go out tomorrow, and with God's grace and God willing and God's gifts that He's given me, I know I can recreate it again. I know how to do that. I've done it
Yeah.
several times. So I'll give you everything if you want to go, Sally. And 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 I've never told anybody this story, and now I'm telling the world. But I'm saying it to say we've been through very, very tough times.
Yeah.
Everybody goes through very, very tough times.
Yeah. And it's
And
relative, isn't it?
it is.
For some people, a tough time could be, they don't have the only problem in the world is they don't have a car.
Yeah.
to drive, or not even that severe, but something very minor,
You
and
got a
yet
hangnail.
somebody that's living on the streets that
Yeah.
can't find a job, and they have a family to raise, and
Yeah.
everything in the world is on top of them. Um, the frustration, the fear, the everything, it's all the same. There's no difference there. And I think it goes back to kind of what you were saying in the first episode about being grateful and telling people those little things that help you along the way every step, and understanding that, I think my little paper cut hurts, but the guy over there sitting in the wheelchair, I know he's been through a lot more, but the pain is the same because it's relative.
Absolutely, Dwight, and I couldn't agree with you more. I I make the comparison exactly like you just said between the homeless person under the bridge and the president of a country. They both have, with all the issues that they have to deal with, they both have the same amount of stress.
Mm-hmm.
Those are both very, very stressful, very, very different situations. The difference between the outcome, I believe, is not what happens to you, but how you respond to what happens to you.
Exactly.
You
Yep.
know, like what happened to me, I could either escalate it and make it worse, or I could take it and figure out what to do with it, and somehow try to have a positive outcome. One of the things I learned with all the different things I did, some of them I didn't particularly enjoy doing, but I would try to find a way to enjoy it,
Yeah.
and and work very hard to make a game out of it or whatever, so that you could enjoy it. So
Yeah.
anyway, by the way, in keeping with joy felt and gratitude after those tough times, not just once, several tough times that your mother and I went through, having resolved them, the rewards have been awesome. These last, I don't know how many years, have just been the greatest, most awesome time. Your mother and I, well, I don't know about your mother. No, I think with her too, but the most awesome times um, we've had. It has been such an incredible joy. And so, back to pushing through and finding a solution and working on it, knowing you're one day closer to what the solution is. And by the way, I never told you, when I told your mother that she could have everything we owned, and I didn't want a thing. She could take it all and I would start over. I didn't tell you we had nothing at the time, but no, no, I'm just
It
kidding.
makes it
No,
easier.
yeah. Make it easier to give it all away when you have nothing. No, we had plenty. Your mother would have had a very comfortable life. I'm just so thankful to God that she didn't take me up um, on my offer. But anyway, yeah, the last years have been filled with joy. And speaking of filled with joy, after several weeks of poking and prodding and testing and inspecting, um, these wonderful people at Mayo are going to. I'll be released tomorrow.
Oh,
Uh,
good.
and yes, and very, very thankful for that. And another opportunity to look around you, and you don't have to look very far to find people that are worse off. Oh my goodness, some of the tragedies and suffering
Yeah.
and pain that you see is just incredible.
That's all for today. Thanks for saddling up with us.
To catch next week's Sound Off with Suzanne and Dwight, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. You can also contact us via email at saddleupandsoundoff@gmail.com.